Pastor Doug here from Crossroads. It's great to be with you. I hope that today's message will draw you closer to Jesus.
My senior year of college, I made some decisions in one of my classes that nearly led to me not getting my degree. So last year of college, there's a number of things I've got going on, but one of them is I have to pass one final class. There was one class that I had to take that was a requirement for graduation, and this was also what it was known as one of the hardest classes in the entire school. And it was known for that because of the professor who taught it. He was one of those guys that did not understand that you had other classes to work with, and would assign you way more reading and way more work than you could ever hope to get done in any length of time. That wasn't the worst of it, though. His exams were really what he was known for, because you never knew what was going to be on them, ever. You never knew what was going to be on them. He would pull anything from anywhere. The kind of joke we had about his class is that anything said in class, anything in the books, anything in the additional resources material, anything said by anyone walking down the hallway while you were in class, anything that was on the news the night before, all of it was fair game for these exams. In fact, the previous exam we had, he pulled out 2 questions where the answers were from the captions of photos in some of the books. So we never had any clue. We're coming down to the last exam of the year, and this one is worth 50% of our grade. 50%. And so people, because they know how this guy is, they are starting to freak out. They are starting to study like mad. I personally had friends who studied for like over 50 hours for this exam, and it's like, that's crazy. This is an undergrad exam. This isn't the MCATs. This isn't the bar exam. It's an undergrad course. So I was like, I'm not doing any of that. No way. And so I didn't study it. And I just kept putting it off and putting it off and putting it off until it's the week of the exam, and I still hadn't studied anything. And he gave us this giant list of things that could potentially be on the exam. I hadn't touched it. Finally, I'm like, okay, I need to get serious about this. The day before the exam, I'm going to spend the whole day, I'm just going to study for this exam, and I'm going to go take it. And then someone offered me concert tickets for the day before the exam. And it was one of my favorite bands. I can't turn that down. I can't not go to the concert. So I did. I went to Philadelphia for the concert, and I got back at 3 a.m. My exam was at 10 a.m. I hadn't studied at all. 0. And this is for a class that I have to pass in order to graduate. By the time I got some sleep, I had basically 1 hour to study for this thing. So I picked 3 things off this random list that he'd given us, and I was like, well, that's the only thing I can study. I spent an hour doing it. I ran quickly to the cafeteria to get a quick bite to eat, and that's when the decision-making process just started hitting me. You idiot. What were you doing? You had weeks to study for this. You had weeks to do this. You did nothing. You could have studied yesterday. What did you do? You went to a concert. Did you get back at a normal hour? No, you didn't. You got back at 3 a.m. And now you're going to fail this exam. You're going to fail this class. You're not going to graduate. You're going to be back here next year trying to do the same thing. What is wrong with you? And I was literally shaking as I walked into this exam. I wasn't planning on failing this class. I wasn't planning on not graduating on time. But the problem for me is I wasn't really planning not to, was I? And to quickly wrap up the story, I walk into the exam. We have no idea what's going to be on it. It is 3 large essay questions. And God is merciful and gracious to me. It was the 3 things I spent an hour studying. It's amazing. But let's just say that was not great decision-making process. The next 2 weeks, we're going to be talking about decision-making. And decision-making is perhaps one of the most important, maybe even under-talked about aspects of our lives. I've used this stat before, but the average person makes 33,000 decisions every single day. 33,000 decisions. Now, many of them seem trivial and are seemingly unimportant. Things like what toothpaste to use or what breakfast to eat or even what to wear. But here's the thing about decisions. Decisions actually lead us in a direction. Decisions lead us in a direction. And that direction that we head down ends up determining our destination. And we can see this in some of the decisions we make. We can see that process. Like, we know it's important who we choose to marry, or what career we choose to pursue, or where we choose to live. We can understand that that has a major effect on our life. But our decision making even shows up in the smaller aspects of our life. Let's take our toothpaste example. It turns out that tooth health is actually highly correlated with overall health. So that toothpaste that you use 700 plus times a year might actually matter. That breakfast you eat, you're going to eat 365 breakfasts a year. That's 365 meals. That's going to affect things like weight, energy, health, which might affect how you perform at work, which might affect things down the line as well. Even what you wear. I actually have a buddy who met his wife through a series of events that began with a specific t-shirt he picked out in the morning. You never know. Decision making is huge, even the small decisions. So in essence, the quality of our decisions becomes the quality of our lives. The quality of our decisions becomes the quality of our life. So since our decisions have such a big impact, it behooves us to spend some time working towards being the best decision makers we possibly can be. So that's what our next 2 weeks are going to be about. This 2-week series called Think Ahead is going to be about. We're going to be talking about decisions, and we're going to be examining 2 different sets of decisions, examples from Scripture. We're going to first look at people whose decision making nearly ruined their lives. And then next week, we're going to be looking at other people who made different sets of decisions that help them avoid the bad decisions and set them up for success going forward. And hopefully we're going to be able to learn some principles from their examples that we can transfer over to our daily lives, things that are going to help us avoid future bad decisions and set us up for success. So this week, we are looking at bad decisions. Speaking of bad decisions, look at this photo. This just gets worse the more you look at this. I mean, so many bad decisions have already occurred in this photo, and so many more are about to. But let's face it, every single one of us is capable of making bad decisions. I mean, why else would anybody ever eat fast food fish? Or like paper straws? Or root for the New York Mets? Or listen to country music? I knew that would get a reaction. I'm not really sorry about that one. But in all seriousness, we've probably all had moments in our lives where we've made some really bad decisions. Things that have cost us relationships, things that have hurt us financially, things that have ruined job or career opportunities, things that just had real consequences in our lives, things that have caused us to say, man, how did I get here? Or maybe even, how did I get here again? Nobody plans on wrecking their lives. But few of us think ahead and plan not to. So let's look at some examples of some cautionary tales that'll hopefully teach us some things about our decision making that can help us avoid those type of things in the future. So the first one that we're going to look at, the first character we're going to look at is Samson. And we're going to be in Judges 16 for this one. And Samson was a great man, but Samson had some major decision-making issues. And his poor decisions led to his downfall. So let's look at where Samson's decisions led him. Let's look at the end of the story first. And it says this, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He, Samson, woke up from his sleep and thought, I'll go out before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. Then the Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, and took him down to Gaza, binding him with the bronze shackles they set him to grinding grain in the prison. Samson didn't plan to have his eyes gouged out, to be chained, to be set into prison. The problem for Samson is that he didn't plan not to. So let's take a look at Samson's decisions and what led him to this terrible fate. Now, just a brief background. Samson was an Israelite, and he was also had a Nazirite vow, which amongst other things meant his life was dedicated to God, and no razor could be used on his head. I would not be eligible for a Nazirite vow. But God gave him tremendous strength, almost superhuman strength, and he was using that strength to protect Israel from their enemies, the Philistines. And the Philistines were scared to death of him. They were looking for any possible way to undermine him, to defeat him, anything they could possibly do. So that's where we pick up the story in verse 4 of chapter 16. Sometime later, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek whose name was Delilah. The rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, "See if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength and how we can overpower him so that we may tie him up and subdue him. Each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver." So Samson falls in love with a woman who is not an Israelite. Now, he starts this relationship with her. And this was something that Samson would have known was against God's commands. So already right from the start, he's in a little bit of a sketchy place. And it continues here, verse 5. Oh yeah, we said that. Verse 5. Strength, overpower him. Yes. So, it comes out, it overpowers him. That's what he said. Delilah, you are going to come and we're going to pay you money to spy on Samson. So right from the start, we find out that she is a spy, and she's aligned against him. Israel's enemies are using this relationship against him. They're using it against him. Even more reason to question Samson's decision-making process. Now, what's interesting about this is not the first time this has happened to Samson. In fact, it's the third time it's happened to Samson. This is the third time Samson has been involved with a woman he shouldn't that led to him being put in physical harm. Earlier in the book, he marries a Philistine woman, and it went very, very badly. The Philistines tried to arrest him. It led to the death of his wife and about 1,000 other people. It did not go well. Earlier in this chapter, he goes and spends the night with a prostitute, which leads to a Philistine raiding party coming and attempting to arrest him again, and leading to him having to break out. Now he's with Delilah, the spy, and she is going to be the seed of his undoing. Clearly, Samson has a problem. One relationship after another continues ending the same way. Samson seems unable or unwilling to see and recognize this pattern, let alone do anything about it. So what do we call that? What do we call it when a person consistently fails to exercise good judgment in particular areas, where they continue to make the same mistake in the same area over and over again? What do we call that? Call it a blind spot. It's a blind spot. Samson has a blind spot, and that's the first thing we can learn from Samson is this: unacknowledged, undealt with blind spots lead to bad decisions. Unacknowledged, undealt with blind spots lead us to bad decisions. Now, each one of us has some areas of our lives where we have weaknesses that we have trouble seeing. They're out there all the time. I mean, why would anybody still be doing socks and sandals or making cell phone calls on speakerphone in public? People have blind spots, but there's all kinds of blind spots, and some of them are harder to detect in our lives than others. It could be things like unhealthy patterns of dealing with conflict or unhealed past trauma that keeps coming up over and over again, or unacknowledged addictions in our lives. It could be harmful views of money. It could be the need for approval. Poor romantic decisions like Samson. We could have communication blind spots that are constantly undermining our relationship with other people. There's all kinds of things that can show up in our lives, and these show up as patterns of behavior that trip us up again and again. Now, one of my favorite movies of all time is The Hunt for Red October. And if you're not familiar with this one, it's a Soviet submarine crew during the Cold War that is trying to defect to the U.S. And throughout the movie, just when the crew seems to be making headway towards the U.S., a saboteur on board jumps up and breaks something in the ship and threatens to halt their progress and threatens the entire mission repeatedly. Now, having an unacknowledged, undealt with blind spot is like having your own personal saboteur in your life. And what's worse is that saboteur is you. And if we don't work to see this, if we don't work to acknowledge them, if we don't work to deal with the blind spots in our life, they will continue to be a wellspring of bad decisions, like they were for Samson. And they're going to sabotage us in our life, in our relationships, in our faith. I can remember for me, for the longest time, I had a blind spot when it came to money. Now, for me, I knew I had this blind spot, but I wasn't dealing with it. I wasn't doing anything about it. So I would repeatedly find myself in weird spots where I was constantly getting behind financially and making bad financial decisions over and over again. And I kept coming back to this and saying, why did I end up here? How did I end up here again? And it took me a long time to then deal with some of those issues. Detecting and dealing with blind spots is not always easy for us. And if you're not sure where yours are, there's two things you can do. One, ask the people around you. Ask the people around you, because almost guarantee you somebody close to you knows what they are. They might even be able to trying to tell you about them for a while now, and you just haven't heard or haven't been able to hear. And the second thing we can do is we can ask God. Ask God to reveal in us the things that we are not aware of that are affecting our decision-making, that are affecting our lives. He will do that for you, because God wants so much more for us than to constantly be tripping over the same things over and over and over again. So back to our story of Samson. Samson's poor decisions to start this relationship with Delilah, and now it's really going to test him. Verse 6. So Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me the secret of your great strength, how you can be tied up and subdued." Samson answered, "If anyone ties me with 7 fresh bowstrings that have not been dried, I'll become as weak as any other man." So he tells her this, and what happens? She goes out and does it. Verse 8. Then the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not been dried, and she tied him with them. With men hidden in the room, she called to him, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you." But he snapped the bowstrings as easily as a piece of string snaps when it comes close to a flame. So the secret of his strength was not discovered. Now, this should have been a giant, glaring, flashing red light into Samson's face. What are you doing? Maybe this woman might not have your best interest at heart. Maybe she might actually be working against you. Does Samson realize that? No, he doesn't. In fact, this pattern continues not just once, not just twice, but 4 times. 4 times this happens. It happens with bowstrings. Then he tells her it's new ropes. Then he tells her to weave braids of his hair into a loom. And every time she does it, finally, it culminates with him telling her about the razor on his head and her doing that. But the whole time, Samson continued the relationship. And that's the second thing we learn from Samson. Unhealthy relationships lead to bad decisions. Unhealthy relationships lead us to bad decisions. For Samson, there was ample evidence that this relationship was unhealthy. It was against God's commands, and she had a track record of violating his trust and manipulating him. And he allowed her to continue to be in his life, to drag him down and compromise him in ways that he had never intended and never wanted to be. Have you ever had a person like that in your life? Have you ever had a relationship like that, where you've had a person that whenever you're around them, you end up feeling or doing things you wouldn't necessarily do otherwise? My dad had an interesting encounter this week where he met up with an old friend that he hadn't seen in years and years. And he was hoping to reconnect and, restart the friendship. And after leaving this lunch, he was like, man, the negativity that came over this guy, the negativity that just washed over me. And I left that lunch feeling just down and horrible. It's like, man, I don't know if I want this relationship back in my life now. And we can have people like that in our lives. Maybe you have friends. Man, they're so much fun to be around. But every time I'm around them, man, maybe I end up drinking more than I'm supposed to. Or maybe I end up saying and doing things that I look back on and I really regret. And this is something like, even if you're not a Jesus follower, I'm sure you've seen this pattern play out in your life or in the lives of others, how unhealthy relationships can lead to bad decisions. And it can be really hard for us because relationships are complicated. They're messy. There's history there. There's emotions there. But unhealthy, unguarded relationships lead to bad decisions. So are there any unhealthy relationships in your life right now? Are there ones that tempt you, that lead you towards making bad decisions, harmful decisions? If so, are you going to deal with them? Are you going to deal with them now, or are you going to wait until they really get you in trouble? Samson didn't want to end up chained, jailed, with his eyes gouged out, but that's where he ended up. And real quickly, one last thing we can learn from Samson is a downfall isn't one bad decision, but a series of bad decisions. It wasn't just one thing. It wasn't just the moment the razor hit Samson's head. It was a series of decisions that led him down this path. For some of you, maybe you're in the middle of a series of bad decisions. Maybe you haven't experienced the fall right now, but you know the patterns of decisions are leading you in a direction that's not going to take you into the good place. We need to interrupt that. We need to stop that series of decisions before it leads to disaster. There's more to learn from decision making. And so we're going to go to our next story, our next example of bad decision making. And this one comes from Peter. And this one comes in Matthew chapter 26. Now, Peter is, of course, a disciple of Jesus. And at this point, we pick up the story. Jesus has been arrested. Peter is scared and he's hanging out in the streets trying to find out what's going on. And Peter finds himself confronted by some of the people in the crowds outside about his relationship with Jesus. So let's look at the decisions Peter makes in this moment. Verse 74 of chapter 26 here says, "Then he," meaning Peter, "began to call down curses, and he swore to them, 'I don't know the man.' Immediately a rooster crowed. Then Peter remembered the word that Jesus had spoken. 'Before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times.' And he went outside and wept bitterly." Peter ends up denying Jesus, betraying Jesus. This failure was the lowest moment in Peter's life. So let's look at the decisions that led to Peter's downfall. We have to start earlier that evening at the Last Supper. Jesus having one final meal with his disciples. He's trying to prepare them for his upcoming death, and he tells them that each one of them is going to fall away. And when he tells them this, Peter declares this in verse 33. Peter replied, "Even if everyone falls away on account of you, I never will." And I think he means it. I'm never going to do it. Everyone else will. I won't. Jesus replies, "I tell you, truly I tell you," Jesus answered, "that very night before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Peter's not done. Peter's like, no, that is not going to happen. Peter declares, "Even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you." And this is where Peter gets himself into the danger zone. Peter is setting himself up for a fall. And that's the first lesson we can learn from Peter, is don't believe it can't happen to you. Peter was not just some random guy. Peter was one of the disciples. He was one of the ones living with Jesus. He built his entire life around Jesus, his entire future around Jesus. He didn't believe that this could happen to him. Somehow he was immune from it. If you've been a follower of Jesus for a while, one of the things that can happen to us is that we can get sucked into a false sense of security. We can get sucked in to this false sense that sometimes certain sins or certain behaviors are just kind of beyond us, or some things that we just won't struggle with. And certain compromise or failures are just not something we deal with. Maybe we believe like we will never compromise financially. We won't be the one to have the affair. We'll definitely be the one who can stand up for Jesus in our workplace or at school or wherever. We're not going to be susceptible to any addictions. Maybe we just believe that there's certain lines we're just not capable of crossing at this point. And this is where we enter the danger zone that Peter was in. We open ourselves up for a fall. Because what happens in those moments when we believe it can't happen to us is we drop our guard. We pay less attention to things that we might otherwise notice. We allow little compromises, little slips. We're not paying attention to the attacks that might be coming our way. And we can unknowingly start making little bad decisions one at a time that can then snowball on us. Thinking it can't happen to us is the precursor to making bad decisions. Peter didn't plan to deny Jesus, but he also didn't plan not to. Now, fast forward a few hours in the story. Jesus has been arrested. He's taken in by Jewish authorities for trial. Everyone scatters. Peter's sticking around, kind of. He's not exactly standing next to Jesus saying, do whatever you need to. I'll be right there with Jesus, but he's still hanging around. And that's when it happens. Now, Peter was sitting out in the courtyard. A servant girl came to him. You were also with Jesus of Galilee, she said, but he denied it before them all. He denied it. Peter failed in that moment. His bravado and his strength failed him. But I think there's one more factor in Peter's fall. There's one more factor in Peter's downside that I think we need to spend a minute on. And that's that isolation leads us to bad decisions. Isolation leads us to bad decisions. Peter finds himself in this pressure-packed situation. He's surrounded by potential enemies. Fear and dread are welling up inside of him. His whole world is collapsing around him. And in this moment of struggle, where does he find himself? He finds himself all alone. All alone. There's no allies anywhere near him. Bad decisions happen when we're isolated. Maybe you felt this. Maybe if you're a business traveler, if you've done any traveling by yourself, maybe you've recognized this. You're traveling in some other city, and just that thought kind of creeps in. No one knows me here. No one will know. Or maybe you find yourself struggling with this when you're home by yourself. Or maybe you found yourself in a place where you are relationally isolated. You don't have friendships. You don't have relationships. You don't have people speaking into your life. And you're finding it hard when those thoughts and those struggles with your emotions come in. There's no one in there in your life to help talk you out of certain decisions. There's no one to help correct your thought patterns. There's no one to keep you on the right path. If this is the case, you've put yourself in a position where you are vulnerable to make poor decisions. When we're isolated, when we're alone, we are much more vulnerable than when we're around others. So let me ask you these questions. How connected are you right now? Who knows what you're up to? Who knows what you're dealing with in your life right now? Who knows what you're struggling with? Who in your life can be completely honest with you about what they see in you? Who can speak into your life and tell you when you're on the edge of making a bad decision? If the answer to each one of these questions is not a specific person, you're in the danger zone when it comes to making bad decisions. So if we want to remedy this, if we want to do something about this, And we need to lean into the body of believers. We need to lean into our friends, our support structures, our community groups. We need to have people in our life who are going to keep us in line, who are going to challenge us and challenge our thinking. And we need to stay connected. If you're married in particular, stay connected to your spouse, both physically and emotionally as much as you can, because that will prevent some of the bad decisions that can happen in isolation. Don't let isolation be the cause of bad decisions. So this morning we've explored the examples of Samson and of Peter, whose decisions nearly led them to disaster. And we've explored some of the roots of those bad decisions. Maybe you've seen some areas in your life where you might find yourself vulnerable to making bad decisions. This week, I want you to commit to making one tangible step towards dealing with one of these areas of your life. Maybe it's blind spots. Maybe you're realizing that I need to explore blind spots in my life. Maybe it's unhealthy relationships. Maybe you need to work on breaking patterns of bad decisions, or believing that you can't stumble. Or maybe you're finding yourself isolated. Most people don't plan on making bad decisions, but they often don't plan not to. Let's be different than those people. If there's one of these areas that's speaking to you today, write that on your connection card on the back of your bulletin. Mark that down. I'd love to be able to pray for you this week as you work on dealing with us. And make sure you come back next week, because next week we're going to talk about how we can think ahead and make decisions that help us avoid all of these bad decisions and set us up for success.
Thanks again for listening. Any step you take towards Jesus is a step in the right direction. You can find out more about us at crbic.org. That's crbic.org.